Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
I noticed that women are unhappy with the fact that they feel alienated from the decision-making process, that very often decisions are made for them that they have nothing to say about. I presume that in the very writing of this pastoral letter that has been important. After all, you have all males who are going to put this forward as their statement.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Sister Sarah Butler, theological consultant for the pastoral letter on women's concerns. Father Bacik and Sister Butler will discuss the pastoral letter on women's concerns, partners in the church. And now, here's Father Bacik.
Sarah, I really enjoy dialoguing with you. You have a gentle manner that goes well with your scholarly achievements. And I think you've used that well in talking about the pastoral letter that the bishops are producing on the concerns of women in church and society. Since you served as a consultant for that particular document, I'm pleased that we're able to discuss it a bit. I was wondering what sort of roles that you expect men to play in all of this now. I know that you had 5 women consultants that worked with the bishops on the committee, and talented women with various backgrounds in psychology and sociology and theology and so on. And I think that you did a lot of listening to Catholic women around the country, 75,000 of them, I think, something like that. What role do you see men playing now in responding to the document? I heard when we had listening sessions in this area that at least sometimes men were present, and I talked to one man who had very strong views about it and was quite negative on the document. As a matter of fact, he told me he participated in those listening sessions. So you're going to start to get more feedback from men, I suppose, on the document as well.
I sincerely hope that we would attract men to the listening sessions that will be held around the country in the different dioceses between now and December 1st. I think it would be very important because this is not really just a dialogue between the clergy and Catholic women. It needs to involve Catholic men as well, those who are not clergy. We are all responsible for somehow coming to grips with what is a liberating message of equality that is being announced in many new ways today. At the same time, we need to distinguish that and to see what is the connection with of this message of equality of women and men in the church, how that's connected with the contemporary feminist movement in our society, to make some important distinctions, to see where these things go hand in glove, will require that men be involved as well as women. There's a conversion being called for here, a conversion of all of us to a larger, more human vision in which the full possibilities of the human community are developed and explored. So I really look forward to having men's point of view here in the subsequent listening sessions.
I notice you have titled your document, Partners in the Mystery of Redemption, a Pastoral Response to Women's Concerns for Church and Society. That word partners has gotten some review, I've noticed. I noticed some women were not happy with the use of the word partners. I use that word a lot in talking about marriage these days, marriage being a partnership, but evidently some have taken exception to that word. Do you want to comment on that?
I can't really think of another word that would say what it is we intend to say, namely that there is an equal participation in the common project of living, of being church, and so on. I don't know another word, although I understand that it does have certain overtones that might seem to relate to...
well, what are those overtones?
Well,
I mean, it's a happy word to me.
Legalistic,
what's the problem?
Well, like you're a partner in a law firm or something like that. See, kind of a legalistic arrangement, or people thinking of partnership exclusively in sexual terms, or people having sexual partners, and they don't want to identify men and women in their relationships as exclusively related in terms of sexual commerce. So the overtones somehow are not happy for some women. Partners doesn't say it. But as I say, we haven't come up with a better. Maybe
well, some woman I saw recommended the word colleagues as being a word that maybe said more of what she wanted anyway.
Sounds kind of like a professional relationship too. It doesn't have the quality that I would be looking for in terms of full sharing.
Do you think we'll get a title change in this?
I have no idea what's going to happen. We've had a very vigorous response. We've heard from many groups already and countless individuals. We have had people writing articles in Catholic journals and papers, and some very fine comments have come in. So we have no idea where it's going to go from here, except that the process will continue, and we have a meeting scheduled for January in which we will review what's happening. The whole point, however, of having this project in a pastoral letter format is to provide an opportunity for a full and free discussion of the issues, and in this case the concerns of women in the church.
I know that you have done professional study of the question of women since getting your doctorate at Fordham in theology, and I'm wondering if with all of that scholarly background and so on, you find that you have learned things as a result of being part of this whole process of producing this first draft of the pastoral.
Yes, I'm sure I've learned things, and I have heard from women who have raised new ideas to my attention and expressed concerns that I wasn't fully in touch with. I don't think that what I have learned sends me in the direction of new speculation so much as a new review of what the Catholic tradition is. I'm more and more convinced that we have a countercultural word to speak to our contemporaries, the same as the bishops have spoken, really a countercultural word on the issue of economy and on the issue of nuclear disarmament. I feel that the Catholic tradition has something very original and specific to contribute to the discussion. I'm not sure I'll be able to articulate it myself, but I feel that the process of studying and reflecting and reviewing this together is going to help us discover what it is that we have to contribute to a large cultural shift that's happening all around us and of which we are an intimate part.
That's right. The church is always must be understood in relationship to the culture, and I think you've done that well in your document. You've started with talking about women's more personal concerns and overcoming sexism and so on. You have a second chapter that deals with women in relationship, where you deal a lot with marriage and the family, and I think draw very well on the long Christian tradition of fidelity in marriage and the importance of commitment. You've raised up some important ideas about males and females, husbands and wives cooperating in the business of rearing children. And then you've talked about women in society, the larger cultural issues, especially the problems of poverty and violence that occur in the culture against women. And there you've drawn on the tradition of the church and the teachings on social justice that we have in the last 100 years or so, and tried to, out of that, come up with some ideas of how women can be treated better, and calling for women to get equal pay for equal work in the society, that there be proper safeguards for maternities so people don't lose financially as a result of maternity. And so I think that, some really good ideas about the society and how the church ought to speak for justice in the society. And that leads you into your fourth chapter, which you call Partners in the Church, begin talking about the situation of women in the church and how all of that might be improved. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the good things about the church to begin with that women see, and what you heard from around the country.
Well, in terms of these voices, we call them voices of affirmation, we heard many women very, very happy with the changes and the renewal since Vatican II. Since the mid-60s, women have been invited to participate much more fully in different roles within the church. For example, as readers or lectors at Mass, and as distributors of Holy Communion, people taking communion to the sick and exercising more fully a pastoral role, both lay and religious women being invited to take much stronger part in the life of the church. Women are celebrating that. They're happy to have opportunities for theological education, which really were not available to us much before the 60s, so that we were both enabled and empowered by education and empowered by the opportunity to assume new roles, to participate more fully in the life of the church. Women also wanted to say, and this is a vast sentiment arising from the hearts of Catholic women, that they feel that Mary, the Blessed Virgin Mary, as a model for women in the church, has been a treasure, that the Catholic devotion to Mary has placed the feminine, the identity of the feminine vocation in a very central place in the life of the church and in their own devotional life, and they couldn't imagine life without Mary somehow calling them forward to the fullness of their own womanhood. There's a tremendous interest in that.
Did you hear the opposite side of that?
Oh, yes.
In the people who see the role of Mary being put forward as fostering passive dependency and so on?
We certainly did. We heard the opposite side of that, in a sense that Mary was somehow inhibiting the full emancipation of Catholic women, that she provided a model of passivity and so on. But within that, we have tried, as we have in each of these chapters, we've laid out the contemporary church teaching, which is normative for us, and even Pope Paul VI in around 1975 or 76, writing about Mary, emphasized that Mary was an active participant in the role of salvation, and cannot be viewed simply as a small, quiet, domestic figure, hovering in the background, but must be seen as the partner of God in the redemptive work. And again, that's been brought forward in the recent encyclical of Pope John Paul II, the last year's encyclical, which dealt with the role of Mary as the one to whom God entrusted his Son, to whose ministry God entrusted himself. Some beautiful and strong expressions about the ministry of Mary, the role of Mary as the participant, an active and indispensable participant in our salvation. So I think that whole question is, say, on the one hand, there are women who, out of their own piety and tradition, cherish the image of Mary as providing this focus for the life of women in the Church, and others who are coming around to rediscover Mary as a figure who speaks to women's liberation rather than the women's oppression.
I noticed that same sort of ambivalence in their response to the clergy. There's a section you have that women are happy because they feel the support of the clergy, and that means a lot to them, and the priests evidently have helped them to make progress and so on. I noticed that you have a quote in here from the Diocese of Toledo in your document. It says, "Priests have no reason to be afraid to share their authority and responsibilities with women. We have no desire to take over. We would like to be treated as thinking persons capable of assuming jobs formerly reserved for men." It's nice to know that the Diocese of Toledo has made contribution to this pastoral. I think I saw them quoted elsewhere in here, and I understand that your committee felt that some of the interventions from Toledo were among the better prepared and more important ones.
We felt that the report was one of the 10 most representative of the various diocesan reports that came in.
Well, it's good to know. But the question of the ambivalence of the relationship to the clergy, while they say they like that support, you have another section in here, section entitled "Insensitivity of Clergy." Now, this is hard to imagine that this would really ever happen, but evidently some women feel that priests at times are insensitive to their needs, that they act in authoritarian manner and patronize them and treat their concerns as trivial and so on. So really, again, we feel that double sense here.
It does. If anything is needed to let the clergy know that they have a key role in the life of the Church, this report would certainly help them realize the importance of their own role, because everything hangs on the balance at the local level. While women could get upset with something from the Vatican or some teaching of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, where it really counts is at the local level in the parish and the church they belong to. And if the priests there are well prepared to do the priestly tasks of preaching and celebrating the sacraments, and they really share the ministry with the people in a collaborative style and involve them in consultations and education and spiritual growth together, women find themselves included. They feel they are known by name, that their own particular gifts are known, that they're not just people who have bake sales and clean the church. But if the priest is not comfortable with women, has not learned a collaborative style, perhaps is not really able anymore or even interested in studying the current trends in theology or learning how to celebrate the sacraments more effectively for the people, if the priest is not preaching well or relating to people, then women feel by that excluded, specifically if they're not known by name and they're not invited to participate or to do what they're able to do, but are relegated to kind of the stereotypical jobs or made to feel guilty for not being available as volunteers. So everything really comes down to the crunch at the parish level. The sensitivity of the clergy to the feelings and perceptions of women is critically important to the life of the Church today, because women are constantly being affected by our own culture and the feminist movement in our culture and trends for equality that come both out of their own impulse and their own experience, and also are supported by organized women's groups around the country. Men need to get in touch with this, find out what's happening, and get to know the women that are in their parishes personally and by name, and to know them as individuals and not just as a class. That is the challenge, and we hope the outcome of the letter would be that the bishops and priests and women and men studying this together will become more sensitive to each other's concerns and interests, and will be able to respond more effectively and learn the necessary skills to collaborate in new ways in ministry.
I noticed that women are unhappy with the fact that they feel alienated from the decision-making process, that very often decisions are made for them that they have nothing to say about. I presume that in the very writing of this pastoral letter that has been important. After all, you have all males who are going to put this forward as their statement. You had sort of a real dilemma, I would think, right in the very writing of the pastoral that had to be attended to, and it represents the larger problem of women not being in the power positions in the church, and therefore how do you ever really get a say in the decision-making process? Now, I know parishes that seem to work fairly well this way, where the pastor is very collaborative in his approach and not threatened by women, and therefore women can have a certain autonomy in particular areas and can have a say in how the parish is going to function and so on. So that makes me think that at the local level it can be done to a degree, but it would seem as though we have a really fundamental and radical problem here of women's exclusion from the power positions in the church.
Well, that certainly is true. Women are not going to be making the decisions or teaching authoritatively because they are not included in the ministerial priesthood, and to that extent they're never going to be, as it is now structured, included in a formal way in those processes. So the best we can aim for in the particular context of this document is to implement as fully as possible what is provided for women. I think amazing strides have been made in the past 25 years. For example, if we look at the revision of the canon law, church law, we discover that the inequity of laymen and laywomen has been remedied across the board, that there are no longer discriminatory attitudes and policies with reference to laywomen. They have full equity with laymen in the church. So that already is a step forward. And then the bishops, and even the bishops in the Universal Synod 1971, and subsequently in the Synod on the Family, and in the Extraordinary Synod a couple of years ago, the bishops of the Universal Church coming together continue to insist that women be involved in participants in all kinds of consultative bodies that can be and are supposed to be set up so that there are avenues for women to participate. I think the immediate challenge is to see that women are prepared to participate well in those, to provide people with, women with the necessary education, if it's a matter of theological training, to provide opportunities and even funding for that, so that women are enabled to participate in the life of the church at the level that men are enabled to participate. If women are not going to be clergy, well then somehow they need to be present in their own capacity. Women religious have many opportunities, and certainly within the last 25 years have had more and more opportunities to be part of this decision-making, and even to engage in, to be involved in pastoral teaching in different ways through their ability to be consultants. It's largely because we are an organized group who have particular services to render that we're available for that. Lay women, however, are not situated in the same way, and so new opportunities need to be created for them to be involved as consultants and participants in decision-making and teaching assemblies.
The bishops try to look at our whole Christian heritage here to help us to get greater equality in the church. I notice they talk about the importance of baptism and confirmation and the Eucharist as being the fundamental sacraments that initiate all of us into the life of the church, that we share in the life of Christ, that there's a fundamental equality that flows from all of that. I think that's one of the great advances we've made lately, is in this whole theology of baptism, yes. Because all the members of the church are baptized. Not all are ordained, but all are baptized, and thus we are all empowered by the Spirit to carry out our responsibilities. We have our individual charisms to be used to build up the body of Christ. I sense a lot of the great frustration of women is the sense that I have something to contribute. I have my unique charism, and it's often blocked. I mean, I can't seem to use my talents the way I would like, and that is extremely frustrating to women. But there is a theology here whose thrust is to undercut that, to say, no, indeed, we need these equal opportunities. And I think in the long run, when we move towards greater equality in the church, that will be the theological basis for it somehow, this oneness in Christ, this equality on the basis of baptism and confirmation, the initiating sacraments, and on our co-responsibility for the church as a whole.
Right. But women definitely need some kind of affirmative action program in the church. There needs to be a consistent effort to include women, to invite them, to discover who are the talented women, to bring them in to church assemblies and to consult with them. I think the pastoral letter, is, as you said, is a good example in the sense that we do have women who are consultants and are functioning as full members of the committee to write this letter, and there has been a committee of women who've been meeting with the bishops since 1971 in a formal way, and that's now a standing committee of the National Conference of Catholic Bishops. There are women on the National Advisory Council, for example. The president of that National Advisory Council is a woman. But we're just beginning with this. We're just beginning to experience that. And until we really can look around and see that there are women present at every major assembly, at every point at which the church is making decisions, that women are present making those decisions there, until we can look around and find women present, we will not have achieved our goal, which is really to be part of the church, to assume responsibility, to be empowered by the church to take full responsibility. I think we have a long way to go. One of the some of the interesting things that have come about as a result of the women's movement in the life of the church have been women recovering their own history, going back and studying the scriptures, studying the history of the church, discovering modes of feminine spirituality, of roles in which women have in fact been actively participant, but these are perhaps hidden roles, have not been celebrated in the history books or in the lives of the saints. They need to be rediscovered and lifted up and talked about, and help. They need to be provided to younger women so that they can discover their place in the church as a place in which they are partners, fully participant in the life of the church.
Sarah, we have to talk about the ordination question more specifically here. I think you can't write a pastoral letter on concerns of women without dealing with ordination. I notice there's an ambivalence. I mean, some women don't want to be ordained, and they don't think women should be ordained. You have others contingent that thinks the church is really backward in this whole area, and that this is the source of a lot of frustration and will never make progress until we do ordain women. I presume that your committee had a lot of trouble dealing with this. I noticed one of your positive recommendations was to admit women to the diaconal office, for them to become deaconesses, or whatever word we use for
deacons,
that, yeah. In whatever the proper word is there, but that there would be some, that be discussed at least. But we've end up, I think, with something that a lot of women are not happy with in this pastoral, on the position you finally come down on ordination. Now, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, many of the persons who came to represent national groups at the initial hearings that our committee held advised us not to write a pastoral letter on women's concerns. They felt there was no way that we could honestly face this question within the context of Catholic teaching, which is that women cannot be admitted to the ministerial priesthood on the basis of an unbroken tradition thought to represent the mind of Christ. So they felt it was futile to us to try to address these questions, that any claim to treat women as equal and then exclude them from ministerial priesthood would be just further infuriating. At the same time, we understood that there were many questions other than the question of admission to ministerial priesthood that concerned women, and to which the church had to respond and could respond favorably and forcefully. So ultimately, after a great deal of discussion among ourselves on the committee, we discerned that we would need to continue with the process and do what we could to try to close the gap between Catholic teaching as it does exist and Catholic practice, so that women are more fully incorporated into the life of the church, but that we could not take up in the context of this letter, the many, many speculative arguments and objections to this, the church's teaching regarding the admission of women to ministerial priesthood. We just couldn't bring it up.
But I know that there is one statement in there, and I can't put my finger on it right now, but it says something about scholars, theologians, and historians and so on have called this traditional question or this traditional position into question. I think that at least might start to open up some dialogue.
I think it will. I think that what the practical, prudential decision is that we could not attempt to develop that dialogue within the context of this letter. We initially did attempt to formulate several paragraphs that would try to elucidate the church's teaching and offer comment on it, but those paragraphs really did not float. We could not discover a way to do that within the context of this document, which is a pastoral response and not the place for original theological research and so on. And we felt that in the end, what we have put down is what we could say, namely that the church teaches that the exclusion of women from ministerial priesthood is not a question of justice or equal rights, but has something to do with the integral connection between the role of Christ as priest and the unbroken tradition in our church, and the whole notion of sacramental representation, that this is the church's teaching, and we would just have to draw a line under that and work with the other parts of the question that we could deal with as I say, recommending, for example, a serious and formal study of the question of admitting women to the diaconal office.
Well, you know, that statement, though, that this is not a question of justice and equal rights, I mean, is really going to be attacked. And I mean,
Well,
I
it
think
is.
properly so. I mean, it's awfully hard to legitimate that position, it would seem to me. I notice in your document you do say some things about the arguments based on the inferiority of women, or that they are to be in a state of subjection to men, are to be rejected, and that would seem good. But
Well,
you're going to
that's-
get a lot of argument on the justice question, because that's exactly what a lot of women feel, that it's unjust.
This document that was written by the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith in 1976, this declaration on the question, did in fact repudiate those unworthy arguments for excluding women, and they are specifically repudiated. I think that it's just now, as I read the literature coming out, that we are beginning to take seriously the arguments of that declaration, to study it again. It's like 10 years later, when some of the disturbances quieted down, there's an ability to look again at those arguments and to sort them out more carefully. To me, one of the key points is that equality is not identity. What do we mean by equality?
Sarah, we could go on forever on this ordination question. We're talking about women in the church and how we're going to make progress, and this pastoral letter tries to move us towards greater collaboration in the ministry, for more opportunities for women. It opens up the new question of the diaconal role, and doesn't make much progress, I think, on the ordination question, because it wasn't within what you were trying to do. I'm sure that's going to get a lot of feedback and continued discussion, and that's something that you wanted to happen. Sarah, I want to thank you so much for being with me and talking about these matters. I appreciate your contribution not only to this program but to the church as a whole in the United States. It is an immense one, and I think will grow as the years go on.
You've been listening to Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo. Today, Father Bacik talked with Sister Sarah Butler, theological consultant for the Pastoral Letter on Women's Concerns. The topic of this week's Reflections was the Pastoral Letter on Women's Concerns, Partners in the Church. If you have any comments on today's show or suggestions for future programs, please write Father James Bacik, Catholic Campus Ministry, 2086 Brookdale Drive, Toledo, Ohio 43606. Funding for this program was provided by the Catholic Communications Commission of the Diocese of Toledo.